Hey, today we're talking about your camera's metering modes. What are they and how would you use them? I'll tell you after the intro.
Ask David Bergman.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ask David Bergman. As you know, of course, I'm David Bergman here answering your photography questions. Today I've got one from Jeff G, and he asks, when you shot with flash in LA at night, what metering mode did you use to get the ambient exposure? No one ever mentions that. Well, Jeff, I'm sorry no one has ever mentioned that to you. What he's referring to is a video I did a few weeks ago with Marisa in LA, and we were outdoors, and I figured out the ambient exposure first and then added in some flash. But yes, you need to be able to figure out what the exposure is, and that's where metering modes come in. Let me talk about metering for a second and how it works. I did another video earlier this year about using a light meter, and a light meter, an external light meter, reads the incident light that's hitting your subject. What your camera reads is the reflected light, so the light that hits your subject and then bounces back and comes into the camera. The camera reads that and tries to figure out if you're on any kind of an automatic mode like aperture priority or full program or auto ISO or anything like that where the camera is deciding what your exposure should be. You have to set a metering mode and tell it what you want it to look at. That's basically what metering modes do. So most cameras have a number of different modes. In general, any variation of the 4 that are in this Canon EOS R, this is the EOS R mirrorless with the 2870 f2 lens on it. I have the grip on here because I just like it to be a bigger, heavier body. And then on top here is the Atomos Ninja 2. That's a monitor just so that you guys can see through the lens of what I'm shooting, but I normally don't shoot with that on a real photo shoot outside of these videos. So metering modes, what I'm going to do is go through the 4 modes that are in this camera. Again, most camera companies have a variation of these, either 3 or 4 different modes, and you can try to figure out exactly what those are on your camera. But the way it works on this here, we're here with Elizabeth. Hey, Ellie. So we're going to just demonstrate her. She's against a white background, and the 4 metering modes here are, we're going to start with evaluative. That's the default in most cameras. Some cameras call it matrix, but it's the default on most cameras. And what that does is your camera is going to look at the entire scene, and every camera company has a really complex algorithm that it uses that we don't really know exactly what it is to break the scene up in different zones, and then it sort of figures out what the best exposure should be. Now, the cool thing about the evaluative mode is that it actually prioritizes whatever is in focus. So in this case, I'm focusing on Ellie, and so it's going to prioritize, it's going to put more weight when it's figuring out exposure on her because it knows I'm focused on her. So I probably want her exposed properly. And by the way, when I talk about proper exposure, what the camera thinks proper exposure is middle gray. 18% gray is what they call it. So forget about all the color in the image and just think about the brightness and darkness. It's trying to average everything out so that it's all 18% gray. It doesn't want anything too bright. It doesn't want anything too dark. That way everything's sort of registered in the camera, and it can be reproduced either in a print or on a computer screen or whatever the case may be. So the evaluative mode is exactly that. It just looks at the entire scene. This is a good way for most beginners just to kind of get started. The camera kind of takes over and lets you just get pretty close in most cases because it's looking at everything. So each of these other modes, though, will give you a little bit more control. It's taking the automaticness back from the camera and giving it to you. So let's go through the different modes here. The next one down is called center weighted, and that's also a wide area mode that's looking at the entire scene. However, as it states, it's putting more weight, it's putting more priority on the center of the frame. So in this case, when we're photographing Elizabeth, she's in the center of the frame. There's a big white background behind it, but you can see that it has set at 6/40th of a second. I'm shooting at f2 at 1600, and it's setting, I'm at aperture priority, so it's setting the shutter speed. If we go back to evaluative, when it looks at the whole scene, it's saying 800th of a second is what it should be at. Now that is because it's seeing all that white, even though it's putting more priority on the subject, it's seeing a lot of that white. So once I go into the center weighted mode, it's now focusing more on her, on the middle of the frame. Her hair is dark, her face is bright, so it's looking mostly at that. And it's pretty close. Right now it's saying 800, 640. It's pretty close to the same as the evaluative because, again, that evaluative is prioritizing the subject. Now, if we go to the next one down, we're looking at the partial metering mode. And what that is now it's taking a smaller part in the center of the frame, Partial metering in this case is usually about 10% of the frame or so. And you can see that circle there, and it's only looking inside that circle to calculate exposure. It's not looking at anything else in the frame. So if you think about it, that's giving you a bit more control, because where you put that circle will change what the exposure is. So in this case, the circle is mostly on her face. It's got a little bit of her hair and just maybe a sliver of the background, and it's that same exposure, that's 6/40th of a second. However, if I move down so it's like more of her shirt and hair, because that's darker now, it has dropped my exposure all the way down to 200th of a second. That's a good like 2 stops almost brighter than I was at. Technically, her hair and her shirt are exposed properly, whatever that means. You know, the middle gray, they are exposed properly, but that's way too bright. I would never actually expose that way, because her face, you can see, is way overexposed. So if I move back so her face is in that center area, then it's going to give me the proper exposure again at 6/40. So that's only going to look, and by the way, if I move all the way out to the white, you can see what happens there. We go to 2500th of a second, because now it's only looking at that white, and it's trying to darken everything down so that that white is middle gray. So it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It really just depends on what you want. And then the final metering mode is called spot metering, and it's basically the same as partial. It's just a smaller area. It's anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5% of the image. It's a really small area. Again, that will give you the most accuracy if you get that point right where you want it. The challenge with that, of course, is that you've got to get it right in the right spot. If you have a subject that's moving around, it might be hard to keep it right on her face, for example, instead of moving over accidentally to her hair or to the background or to anything else that's going to screw up that exposure. So you can see when I move off again to the background, it's going to be way off. When I move down to her hair, it's going to be way overexposed. It's way underexposed on the background. So as I go back on her face, which is what I want to expose for, it gives me the proper exposure. So those are generally the 4 metering modes that pretty much every camera has. Now, you asked about specifically what metering mode I use. The truth is, here's the big secret, I really don't use them at all, because I'm shooting manual. Now, there's a couple ways you can use manual, and I'm not suggesting that that metering modes have no impact. The meter is still working, but if I switch over to manual, for example, the meter is still down there. You can see it at the bottom, and if I slow down my shutter speed and I'm overexposed, you can see the meter has moved up, and you can see if I go the other way, the meter has moved down. However, the camera's not changing it for me automatically. I have to make the decision based on that. So if I want to use the meter, I can set the metering mode I want and then look at what it's suggesting as being the proper exposure based on my metering mode and where I have the, whether I'm on a spot or evaluative or whatever, and then I can choose what to lock in and how to expose it. That's how I shoot. The truth is, honestly, most of the time when I'm setting my exposure in a scene where the light isn't changing, like this one, for example, I will not even really look at the meter. I take a picture and I use the screen on the back. I take one quick look at it and make sure it looks good, and then I turn it off and I just shoot away. And I'm not even looking at that meter. If I was on an auto mode and I was on spot meter, for example, and I was shooting frame to frame and I put her off center, let's see what happens here. If I'm on, let's go back to aperture priority, right? And I'm on the spot meter mode, right? And it's right on her face. That's great. But then as I'm shooting, let's say I zoom all the way out and I want to put her off center. If I go like that, and then if I'm on any kind of an auto mode, it's not going to work because that spot is going to change. I want to use that spot to figure out the exposure. It's at 640 in this case, and then I'm going to go to manual. I'm going to lock it in at 640, and then I can just shoot away. I can recompose, I can move in, I can move out, I can do whatever I want there and not have to worry about the exposure changing. So that's how I shoot. I really don't use the metering modes that often. Once in a while I might use it just to do a quick check. That's about it. So that's why I didn't mention the metering modes in that video, because it's really not relevant to me for the most part. But by understanding what they do, you can take control of your exposure and get the exact image you want. Hey Jeff, thanks for asking that question. I appreciate it. Listen, go to AskDavidBergman.com if you have your own photo questions. There's a form on there you can submit. I'll pick the best ones to answer them on a future show. Also, don't forget to subscribe down below. This is Adorama TV. There's all kinds of great photo shows. It's free photo content. There's a lot of subscribers. every week, so make sure you're on there if you're not already getting them. Thanks so much for joining me. Come back next week, I'll have a new question. I'll see you then.